Do you remember your first day of school? Think back to how you felt emotionally at that time of your life. Maybe you were excited or nervous. If you've had the opportunity to attend college, do you remember what it felt like to experience that freedom and independence? Perhaps you were scared about not finding the dining halls in between your 15-minute break between classes, or getting lost on campus. What about school? Academically, did you have any fears? What if I'm just not cut out for engineering? Or I thought English is what I wanted to do, but maybe I'm leaning more towards art now. Perhaps you've had some of these fears. It's conceivable that anyone entering a new environment, not just first-year college students, would share some of these concerns. Or possibly you thought you would not fit in. And I'm not referring to a superficial sense of belonging that may result from being labeled as cool or popular. No, I'm talking about what if no one in my major looks like me? Will I be all by myself? Those last two are a few of the worries I had going into my architectural education. For those of you who are unaware, architecture is an old man's game. If you do it, there's a good chance you're white, there's a good chance that you're a man, and if you're successful, there's a good chance that you're old, right? So going into my chosen field of study, I already knew this, but pursuing a career in architecture is what I deeply desired. In high school, I decided to study architecture after my dad pointed out that I loved math and had an affinity for creation. I even went to an architecture camp before I applied to college. I knew what the demographics were coming into the field of architecture. Although I wasn't blind to these realities, I still had these fears. I wondered, will I be treated unfairly, overlooked, or have a professor or colleague be unkind to me? What might I be up against as a Black woman? For me, these fears were valid, and sadly, I actually experienced these exact problems. I am approaching the culmination of my Bachelor of Architecture degree, and it was not a walk in the park. I've had struggles. Just a few years ago, at the height of my struggles, I was mistreated, bullied, and regarded as other, unlike my white colleagues. I was told that somehow my ambition would cause me to flunk out of college, while my non-Black colleagues were praised for their drive. Instead of being guided with care, I was written off as lazy. I've been humiliated by someone in a position intended to aid me and support my growth as a student, by a professor. Sadly, these stories of inadequate support, alienation, and bullying are not rare occurrences for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color in architectural education and even in the profession. And as horrific as it is, my story still pales in comparison to other accounts of bullying that Black architecture students regularly face. The first time I met a Black architect, I was 16 years old. He was a kind, older Black man who guided me and gave me several resources. I was one of the lucky ones to meet a Black architect so young. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I've never met an astrophysicist and I'm 32. But think about it. When is the last time you've been in a building? Today, who do you think was on the team of people who built that building? History suggests that it was most likely a team of non-Black people, and if there was Black people on the team, there was only one. When was the first time you had a teacher who looked like you? Preschool, kindergarten, first grade? Or maybe you never had a teacher who looked like you. When was the first time you had a lawyer who looked like you? A doctor? Think about all of these ages in which you're exposed to the racial norms in the US. If you're white, these ages are probably in your early childhood. If you're Black, there's a chance that you still have not had these experiences yet. The first time I met a Black woman architect, I was 20 years old, and I had to seek out that opportunity. It was not a given for me to meet one serendipitously. It was the annual conference for the National Organization of Minority Architects. It was my first time traveling alone to New York City. I went to the opening event on a Wednesday night. I was in a room with hundreds of people, and almost all of them were Black. These people all worked in the built environment. Black architects, planners, designers, construction managers. I could not believe my own eyes. I couldn't even focus on the lecture of beautifully created work because I was experiencing a culture shock. I was meeting Black women who were architects, left and right. I was finally seeing the examples that I did not receive when I was deciding on my future career. What if I had not made up my mind that I wanted to study architecture? even after I had all of those horrible experiences in my education. If I would have given up, I would not have met these Black women. If it were not for my family, I would have switched majors. If I did not have that critical support, I would not be here. The process of becoming a licensed architect is already arduous, even without the additional struggles with which Blackness is linked. To even be able to become a licensed architect, you have to complete either an accredited 5-year professional bachelor's degree or a 4-year bachelor's degree with a 2 or 3-year master's degree. You must choose one of these schooling options before sitting for the 6 licensure exams and completing the necessary 3,740 hours of experience at an architecture office. Once you finish all of these steps, you can officially regard yourself as a licensed architect who can practice architecture independently. This process varies in length, but continues to be around 8 years, including education and training. An architectural license is not necessary to work in the field of design, but the license itself presents itself as the highest qualification a practitioner can receive. This process takes prolonged dedication, vast financial resources, and most importantly, time. Now, I would like to give you some context. I will get to the numbers in a second, but I believe that visuals are one of the best ways to learn something new. I have this demonstration. According to 2020 data from the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, or NCARB, this represents how many licensed architects there are in the US. According to the Directory of African American Architects, this represents how many Black men are licensed architects in the US. And this represents how many Black women are licensed architects in the US. Sadly, this is not a joke. There are over 116,000 licensed architects in the US right now. Of that number, 2,378 of them are Black. And of that number, as of today, only 502 of them are women. There have only been 502 licensed Black women architects to ever live. 2% of all architects are Black, and only 0.4% of all architects are Black women. That is less than half of 1%. So where do we go from here with all this information? Why does any of this matter? I believe that we are at a unique time in history as it relates to architecture. There is no one person in this world who has not been impacted by architecture, positively or negatively. There are several initiatives popping up by wonderful individuals, mainly to increase the representation of Black people, specifically Black women, in the field of architecture. Project Pipeline is a camp for minority middle and high school students. They're doing the critically crucial work of exposing the career path of architecture to young Black and brown children. Tiffany Brown and her 400 Forward organization, Tiara Hughes and her First 500 organization, these Black women are working to drastically increase the number of Black women architects. What can you do to positively support the increase of Black architects being rightly represented? Advocate for Black students to go to design camps by sponsoring them. Financially support organizations that are doing this heavy work. And this is a big one. To people who work in the built environment, within that old man's game, you have to passionately restructure your hiring and also your work to create meaningful change. The consequences of the Black students' relentless pursuit of an architectural education trickle down in a major way to affect every arena of architecture. An increased population of Black licensed architects births a greater network of Black professional mentors for young Black architecture students, while also creating a model for young Black children who are unaware that architecture is for them. This model would easily begin to shift the paradigms of young Black children. Then we can't just stop with increased representation. We need equitable support. Representation is critical, but more importantly, massive structural change must happen in order for the profession of the built environment to effectively combat racism. Socially, the very existence of Black architects is an act of destruction to the racist subjugation of Black people in this nation, which systematically treats Black bodies in an inhumane manner. The Federal Bureau of Prisons identifies 38.6% of all inmates as Black. But according to 2019 US Census estimates, Black people comprise only 13.4% of the population. The National Low Income Housing Coalition identifies about 45% of all public housing residents as Black, while Black people comprise only 13.4% of the population. Numbers do not lie. They tell a story. The story of systemic racism in this country is not new. This is the continuation of a well-implemented design. In order for change to be sustainable, the current systems and processes will have to alter or be dismantled. From education to licensure, these dilapidated systems are not equitable. Due to implicit biases, racism, and the makeup of our society, it is notably more difficult for Black people to complete an architectural education and licensure process. But the change I see to create new worlds can be a reality. Gaining new Black architects is a necessity for transformation, but it is crucial for Black architects to be in positions of power in order to make actual, tangible change in the way our society operates, even in the literal buildings we make and reside in. Architecture is one field of numerous arenas where the Black voice has been extinguished and needs to be recentered. There must be practices and systems solely dedicated to Black empowerment and liberation in order to bring the Black voice back to the spotlight where it has always belonged. Our world has suffered greatly because of an aggressive centering of Eurocentric ideals. This metamorphosis and change towards liberating the Black voice must be extensive and frightening. The way we practice architecture, urban planning, design, these disciplines will all have to evolve for this problem to truly begin to be remedied. Changing the face of architecture is extremely important, but changing the way we do architecture is fundamental. Though I have personally experienced many challenges in my schooling as a Black woman, I have learned that the power of perseverance is especially relevant, even in this hard reality of white power and glorification within the field of architecture. Academic and professional success for Black architecture students means more than having a successful career and doing the job well. Black architects have always had what it takes to be successful, and I stand here as an example of an amplified Black voice from the intended 0.4%. Will you join me in amplifying more? Thank you.